There are clear signs that the pressure of investigations and a lot of unflattering stories might be getting to President Trump. There has been a flurry of reporting on the president, from the struggle to hire and retain talented lawyers for the White House, to his dealings with Michael Cohen, to, of course, secrets held by the owner of the National Enquirer, David Pecker. It comes on top of the immunity deals for that secret keeper and his company's personal CFO. That's a lot.
Yeah, and this is all leading to the president lashing out on Twitter over the past few days. Take a look at this. And this morning, he's slamming the news media. That's normal. But he's pushing conspiracy theories about things like the FBI to search engines that aren't giving him the PR that he feels he deserves.
Now we want to bring in former Trump Organization Executive Vice President Barbara Rez. Barbara, we know that President Trump loves attention. Maggie Haberman pointed it out earlier that Trump has told associates, listen, a few years ago, he wasn't getting New York Times covers. Now he's on the front page day in and day out. But you worked with this man for over 20 years. When you look at his behavior, his conduct right now, on a day like this, we look and think, why on earth would he be lashing out like this? What does it tell you? Is this the man you know?
It is very much the man I know, but amplified. I mean, you know, he sort of is not, has no self-control. I mean, there was never any external control to speak of. I mean, you know, way back he used to listen to people, but, you know, after that, you know, once he became very famous and full of himself, there was no external control, but he did have a little bit of self-control. Right now, it looks like he's out of control.
Did he, you say when he took advice or did listen to people, that's one of the things that's in some of these stories, that people who give him advice he doesn't like seem to disappear. They either leave of their own volition or they're fired. And then he chooses to surround himself with people who will only tell him what he wants to hear. Tell me about your experience that way with him. Did he like that back then too?
You know, he had people that were good people way back. I'm talking about the Trump Tower days and before that, and he did listen to them. But of course, he liked to be flattered. I mean, one of the ways that I got things done and other people got things accomplished was through flattery, especially if we needed him not to do something we didn't think he should do. We'd sort of have to convince him that our idea was his and it was a good one. So he's always...
That's how I parent my 5-year-old, though.
Well, that could be. That could be. But, you know, I think a lot of big people are very into themselves. I'm not going to say it's only Donald, but this was my experience. Later, he seemed to hire more people that were sycophants, that were, you know, basically going to tell him exactly what he wanted to hear and do exactly what he wanted to do. And it seems to have gotten worse at this point.
This media question, he keeps going back to this dishonest media stuff. He's tweeted, I just cannot state strongly enough how totally dishonest much of the media is. Truth doesn't matter to them. They only have their hatred and agenda. This includes fake books, which come out about me all the time, always anonymous sources on our pure fiction enemy of the people. He didn't always hate the media.
Oh, no.
He was also himself, if I may, an anonymous source.
Yeah. Right, absolutely. No, and I don't think he really hates the media right now. I think he loves the fact that he gets so much coverage. He's just taking advantage of his ability to sway his base against the media, against certain media, by coming out and saying the things he does. He loves being in the news, and even back when we weren't in the news that much, he really liked being in it. You know, no news is bad news, he used to say to me.
So the fact that he tells lies day in and day out that can be disproved, right? He goes after Google saying they didn't cover his State of the Union address when he didn't give one. Why does the president, in your estimation, given how long you knew him, tell lies on a regular basis that are easily fact-busted?
Well, it depends on who he's talking to. I mean, you know, if it's somebody that won't check the facts, then that's good, then he's got that out there and he's proven that. For people that check the facts, he's already said what he wanted to say, so, you know, it may or may not get, you know, torpedoed by what the truth is.
Yeah, and I guess that is interesting. He's tweeted about the edited Lester Holt interview. I've posted it on my Twitter account. It's been there for everybody to see. All one would have to do is look for it. It's there. He said it's edited. It's very strange. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.